temperature has dropped to 4 degrees below zero. Colonel Antonio Russo's breath forms clouds in the pre-dawn darkness of the Pindus Mountains, somewhere in the god-forsaken wilderness between Albania and Greece. His hands shake, not from cold, though his summer-weight Italian uniform provides almost no protection against the November frost, but from something worse. Fear. For 5 days, his regiment has advanced into Greek territory. The maps promised easy terrain. The intelligence reports promised a population ready to welcome Italian liberation. General Praska promised this would be over in 2 weeks. All of it was lies. Now, Colonel Russo huddles behind a limestone outcrop at an 800 meters elevation, listening to a sound that turns his blood to ice. Not the wind howling through the mountain passes, not the distant rumble of artillery. Something more primal. Singing. Greek voices, hundreds of them, echoing off the mountain walls. Battle hymns in a language Russo doesn't understand, but the meaning is unmistakable. The Greeks aren't retreating, they're not surrendering, they're coming. As the first light of dawn breaks over the Pindus range, Russo sees them. Greek Evzones, elite mountain troops in their distinctive uniforms, emerge from positions his scouts swore were empty. They move like ghosts through terrain the Italians have spent 5 days struggling to navigate, attacking uphill against supposedly superior Italian forces. The first mortar round lands 30 meters from Russo's position, then another. Then the entire world becomes noise and fire and screaming. Within 3 hours, the Giulia Alpine Division, 25,000 of Italy's supposedly finest mountain troops, will be shattered, scattered, and fleeing for their lives back toward Albania. Within a week, the entire Italian invasion will collapse into the most humiliating military disaster in modern Italian history. Within 6 months, Benito Mussolini's dreams of Mediterranean empire will lie in ruins in the frozen mud of Albanian mountain passes. But in this moment, as Colonel Antonio Russo watches the impossible unfold before his eyes, only one thought fills his mind. How did we get this so catastrophically wrong? To understand how one of Europe's great powers came to suffer one of history's most humiliating military defeats, we must first understand the man who ordered it and the delusions that drove him. Benito Mussolini, Il Duce of fascist Italy, sits in the Palazzo Venezia in Rome on the morning of October 15, 1940. At 57 years old, he has ruled Italy for 18 years, transforming himself from a socialist journalist into a totalitarian dictator who claims to embody the spirit of ancient Rome reborn. But on this October morning, Mussolini seethes with frustration. His ally Adolf Hitler has conquered Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries and France without consulting him. Germany has achieved in months what Mussolini's Italy has failed to accomplish in years. The Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, our sea, as Mussolini calls it, remains frustratingly unconquered. Albania, a poor acquisition in 1939. Libya, a desert backwater. East Africa, isolated and vulnerable. Egypt. The British still hold the Suez Canal. Mussolini needs a victory. Something quick, cheap, and glorious that will prove Italy's martial spirit and establish him as Hitler's equal rather than his subordinate. Greece seems perfect. Greece is not a military power, Mussolini tells his son-in-law and foreign minister Galeazzo Ciano on October the 15th. The Greeks will collapse at the first blow. We will present Hitler with a fait accompli just as he has presented us. By the time the Germans learn of our invasion, we will be in Athens. Ciano, a more cautious man than his father-in-law, expresses concern about the military's readiness. It's October. Winter approaches. The Greek border is mountainous. Supplies are limited. Mussolini dismisses every objection with a wave of his hand. I will break the backs of the Greeks, he declares, and no one will be able to say a word against it. In the Albanian capital of Tirana, General Sebastiano Visconti Prasca receives his orders on October the 16th with a mixture of excitement and dread. At 51, Prasca is ambitious, politically connected, and utterly convinced of Italian military superiority. But he's also been in Albania long enough to know the realities on the ground. His invasion force consists of approximately 85,000 troops spread across difficult terrain. They're supposed to invade Greece, a nation of 7 million, with inadequate supplies, no winter clothing, obsolete maps, and almost no motorized transport in some of the most rugged mountains in Europe. The timeline Mussolini demands is insane. 2 weeks to victory. Prasca should refuse. He should demand more troops, better equipment, more time to prepare. Instead, he tells Rome what Mussolini wants to hear. The operation is entirely feasible. Greek resistance will be minimal. Dr. Elena Kowalski, professor of modern European history at the University of Vienna, explains, Prasca was a political general, not a military genius. He understood that Mussolini wanted affirmation, not reality. Like so many in fascist Italy's military command, he confused bravado with competence and assumed that Italian élan would overcome any material deficiency. It was a fatal miscalculation that would cost thousands of Italian lives. On the Greek side of the border, Lieutenant Dimitrios Kaslas of the Greek 3rd Infantry Division has no idea his life is about to change. At 26 years old, this school teacher from Ioannina joined the army as part of Greece's general mobilization. He writes letters to his wife Maria, tends to his rifle, and tries not to think about the rumors of Italian buildups across the Albanian border. Greece is a small nation, population 7.3 million compared to Italy's 44 million. The Greek military is poorly equipped with obsolete artillery and almost no air force. On paper, Greece cannot possibly defeat Italy in a conventional war. But Dimitrios and men like him possess something that cannot be measured in division counts or artillery pieces. Philotimo, a Greek concept encompassing honor, dignity, and the refusal to accept humiliation. Greece has been occupied before by the Ottomans for 4 centuries. The Greeks remember. They remember what it means to fight impossible odds. They remember that mountains are fortresses if you know how to use them. And they're about to remind the world what happens when you underestimate a nation fighting for its survival. The date is October 28, 1940. The time is 3:00 a.m. Italian ambassador Emanuele Grazzi arrives at the home of Greek Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas in Athens. Metaxas, himself a former general and authoritarian leader, knows why Grazzi has come at such an hour. You don't wake a prime minister at 3 a.m. to deliver good news. Grazzi, clearly uncomfortable, presents an ultimatum. Greece must allow Italian forces to occupy strategic points throughout the country or face war. Italy accuses Greece of violating its neutrality and supporting Britain. The ultimatum expires in 3 hours, at 6:00 a.m. Metaxas doesn't hesitate. OXI, he says. No, it's a single word, but it reverberates through history. October 28th becomes OXI Day, No Day, celebrated in Greece to this day as the moment a small nation refused to bow to fascist aggression. Grazzi, by some accounts nearly in tears, apologizes for his government's actions. Metaxas responds, "We will defend our country. If Italy wishes war, we will fight." At 5:30 a.m., before the ultimatum technically expires, Italian forces begin crossing the Greek border from Albania. The invasion has begun. The Italian plan calls for a 3-pronged assault. The main thrust will drive through the Pindus Mountains toward Ioannina and the strategic port of Preveza, cutting Greece in half. A second force will attack along the coast toward the vital port of Salonika. A third will secure the Ionian Islands. On paper, it's sensible. In reality, it's a catastrophe from the first moment. The Italian intelligence is fantastically wrong. The Greek forces are not demoralized and ready to surrender. The population is not welcoming. The terrain is not easily negotiable. The weather, dismissed by planners in Rome, is abysmal. Lieutenant Dimitrios Kaslas and his unit receive mobilization orders at 600 a.m. Within hours, they're marching toward the front. Dimitrios has never fired his rifle in combat. Many of his fellow soldiers are farmers and shopkeepers, middle-aged reservists in worn uniforms. But as they march, something remarkable happens. Civilians line the roads, offering food, water, and encouragement. Women sing patriotic songs. Old men weep openly, remembering past struggles for Greek independence. A sense of national purpose, dormant during years of economic depression and political instability, suddenly ignites. "We were afraid," Dimitrios would later write to his wife. "Of course we were afraid, but we were also angry. Who were these Italians to tell us we must submit? We had submitted to no one since driving out the Turks. We would not start now." The first major engagement occurs on October the 28th at the Kalamas River. Italian forces, expecting light resistance, instead encounter prepared Greek positions with artillery support. The attack stalls. Italian casualties mount. Further inland, in the Pindus Mountains, the Julia Alpine Division begins its advance toward Metsovo and Ioannina. These are elite troops, specifically trained for mountain warfare. The Greeks opposing them are a hastily assembled collection of infantry and local militia. The Italians advance for 4 days, making slow progress against stiffening resistance. Roads prove nearly impassable. Supply lines stretch dangerously thin. The Greeks retreat, but in good order, always maintaining cohesion. Colonel Antonio Russo, commanding a regiment in the Julia Division, writes in his diary on November 1st, "The enemy fights with unexpected determination. Every village must be taken house by house. Our casualties are higher than anticipated. The cold is severe. The men are exhausted." What Russo doesn't yet know is that the Greeks are preparing something unprecedented. A counteroffensive by the defender against an invading force that on paper vastly outnumbers and outguns them. November 2nd, 1940. Greek General Alexandros Papagos, commander of the Hellenic army, has spent 5 days watching the Italian advance. A 61-year-old career officer educated in Belgium, Papagos understands mountain warfare. More importantly, he understands his enemy. The Italians have overextended themselves. Their supply lines are vulnerable. Their troops are spread thin across impossible terrain. They're wearing summer uniforms in winter conditions, and they've walked directly into a trap. At dawn on November 2nd, Papagos unleashes a coordinated counterattack across the entire front. In the Pindus Mountains, Greek forces, including the elite 8th Infantry Division and local mountain troops who know every goat path and hidden approach, hit the Julia Alpine Division from 3 sides simultaneously. Colonel Russo's position is overrun within the first hour. He and a handful of men flee through snow and ice, abandoning equipment, ammunition, and the dead. The Julia Division, 25,000 strong when it entered Greece, effectively ceases to exist as a fighting force. Within days, it will have suffered 5,000 casualties, with thousands more missing, captured, or scattered. Lieutenant Dimitrios Kaslas participates in the counterattack near Kalamas. His regiment advances against Italian positions that seemed impregnable days earlier. But now the Italians are cold, hungry, and demoralized. Many surrender immediately. Others flee, leaving behind artillery, vehicles, and supplies the poorly equipped Greeks desperately need. "I fired my rifle for the first time," Dimitrios writes. "The sound was deafening. The man next to me, Yorgos from Patras, a fisherman in civilian life, was laughing and crying at the same time as we advanced. We were winning. Greece was actually winning against Italy. It seemed impossible, like a dream we feared to wake from." The Greek advance accelerates. By November 8th, just 11 days after the Italian invasion began, Greek forces have driven the invaders completely out of Greece and are pushing into Albanian territory. By November the 22nd, the Greeks have captured the strategically vital town of Korçë in Albania, taking 2,000 Italian prisoners and massive quantities of supplies. If you appreciate stories like this, tales of courage against impossible odds, of small nations refusing to bow to aggression, of military disasters caused by arrogance and miscalculation, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring you forgotten chapters of history every week, stories of human determination that shaped our world. Your support through subscriptions, likes, and comments helps us continue researching these deep dives into the moments that changed everything. Now, back to the Albanian mountains, where the Italian catastrophe is about to get even worse. By December 1940, the situation for Italy is beyond catastrophic. Not only has the invasion failed, but Greek forces now occupy a significant portion of southern Albania. The entire world watches in astonishment as tiny Greece humiliates one of Europe's major powers. The human cost is staggering, particularly for Italy. The lack of winter clothing alone causes thousands of casualties from frostbite and exposure. Italian soldiers in summer uniforms face temperatures dropping to 20 degrees in the Albanian mountains. Supply systems collapse. Morale disintegrates. Private Giuseppe Bevilacqua, a 22-year-old conscript from Tuscany, keeps a diary that will be discovered decades later. His entry from December 15, 1940, captures the horror. Franco died last night, not from bullets or shells, but from cold. We held him between us, trying to keep him warm, but he just stopped breathing. The medics won't come this far forward anymore. The roads are impassable. We buried him in the snow with 3 others. No one said prayers. We don't have the strength. My feet are black. I can't feel my hands. We haven't received supplies in 6 days. The Greeks attack every night. They know these mountains. We are dying here, and no one at home knows or cares. Giuseppe Bevilacqua will die of exposure on December 28, 1940. He is one of approximately 13,755 Italian soldiers who will die during the Greek campaign, many from cold and disease rather than combat. Meanwhile, in Rome, Mussolini rages. His quick, glorious victory has become a humiliating disaster broadcast to the entire world. Newsreels show Italian prisoners, frostbitten Italian, wounded, and triumphant Greek soldiers. British propaganda ruthlessly mocks Italian military incompetence. Hitler, infuriated that Mussolini's adventurism has opened a new front and given Britain a foothold in the Balkans, begins planning a German intervention, Operation Marita. But the Germans cannot intervene immediately. Winter and logistics prevent major operations until spring. This gives the Greeks precious months to consolidate their gains and prepare defenses. The winter of 1940 to 1941 in the Albanian mountains is one of the harshest in decades. Snow lies meters deep. Wind cuts through the passes with lethal force. Supply lines, already inadequate, become nearly impossible to maintain. Both sides suffer, but the Greeks possess crucial advantages. They're fighting closer to their supply bases. They're accustomed to mountain conditions, and, most critically, they're defending their homeland rather than prosecuting an unwanted invasion. Italian morale collapses. Whole units surrender without fighting. Desertion becomes epidemic. Officers lose control of their men. Dr. Marcus Hammond, professor of military history at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, explains the Italian army in Albania in winter 1940-41 represents one of the most complete military breakdowns in modern history. This wasn't just tactical or operational failure, it was systemic collapse at every level. Logistics, intelligence, command, morale, equipment, every single aspect of military organization failed simultaneously. The Greeks didn't just defeat the Italians, they exposed the hollowness of fascist military pretensions. The Greek success triggers a wave of international support. Britain, desperate for any good news after Dunkirk and the fall of France, sends RAF squadrons to support Greece. British and Commonwealth forces begin arriving in early 1941. For a few magical months, it seems possible, impossibly, wonderfully possible, that Greece might actually win this war. Lieutenant Dimitrios Kaslas, now promoted to captain after his bravery in the November counteroffensive, spends Christmas 1940 in a captured Italian position near Himara. His men feast on captured Italian rations, far superior to Greek supplies, and sing traditional songs. "We allowed ourselves to hope," he writes to Maria on December the 27th. "We had done the impossible, defeated Italy, captured Albanian territory, earned the respect of the world. Britain stood with us. Surely the worst was over. Surely we had proven that small nations with brave hearts could resist tyranny. How naive we were. How beautiful that naivety seems now in retrospect, knowing what came after." What came after was Germany. April 6th, 1941. 5:15 a.m. The Luftwaffe strikes. German bombers hit Belgrade, Yugoslavia, killing 17,000 civilians in a terror raid designed to break Yugoslav resistance. Simultaneously, German forces invade both Yugoslavia and Greece in Operation Marita, Hitler's intervention to salvage Mussolini's disaster and secure Germany's southern flank before the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Greek army faces an impossible situation. Their best divisions are in Albania, having spent 5 months fighting the Italians. Now they must defend against German forces attacking from Bulgaria, fresh troops with overwhelming air superiority, modern tanks, and the tactical doctrine that conquered Poland and France. It's no contest. The Greek Metaxas line fortifications, built to defend against Bulgarian invasion, holds for several days against the German advance. The defenders fight with the same desperate courage they showed against Italy. But courage cannot stop Stuka dive bombers and panzer divisions. By April 9th, German forces have broken through. By April 20th, they've encircled Greek and British forces. By April 27th, German troops enter Athens. The speed of the German victory, just 21 days from invasion to capitulation, stands in devastating contrast to the 5 months of Italian failure. The symbolism of the Greek surrender is extraordinary. Greek forces formally surrendered to Germany, refusing to surrender to Italy, despite having been at war with Italy far longer. Even in defeat, the Greeks deny Mussolini his victory. Captain Dimitrios Kaslas is captured by German forces on April 24, 1941, near Larissa. His final letter to Maria, smuggled out through intermediaries, reflects the bittersweet tragedy of the Greek campaign. "My dearest Maria, we have lost, but we are not defeated. For 6 months, we showed the world that tyranny can be resisted, that small nations have dignity, that courage matters. We beat the Italians, beat them soundly, and embarrassed them before the entire world. It took Germany itself to defeat us, and even then, we made them pay for every meter. I do not know when I will see you again. I do not know if I will survive captivity. But I know this. We fought for something that mattered. We said OXI, no, to fascism, and that no echoed around the world. Other nations heard it and took courage. That must count for something. Tell our children, when they are old enough to understand, that their father fought for Greece, and Greece did not bow willingly to tyranny. Dimitrios Kaslas will survive the war and return to teaching in Ioannina. He will live to see his country liberated, to see his children grow, to see Greece join NATO and the European Union. He will die in 1987 at age 73, having told his story to anyone who would listen. Colonel Antonio Russo, the Italian officer who witnessed the destruction of the Giulia Alpine Division, also survives. But his war diary, published posthumously in 1968, reveals a man broken by what he experienced in the Albanian mountains. "We were sent to fight a war our leaders never prepared us for, against an enemy they completely misunderstood, in conditions that made success impossible. And when we failed, as we were doomed to fail, they blamed us for lacking Italian spirit. But spirit cannot substitute for warm clothing, adequate supplies, competent intelligence, and realistic objectives. I watched brave men die for Mussolini's vanity. I will carry their frozen faces with me to my grave. Rousseau will never speak publicly about the Greek campaign. He will resign his commission in 1943 after the Italian armistice and spend the rest of his life as a wine merchant in Piedmont, refusing all interviews about his military service. Giuseppe Bevilacqua, the young conscript from Tuscany, has no post-war story. His frozen body was recovered in March 1941 and buried in a military cemetery near Tepelene, Albania. His diary was returned to his family in 1946. His mother, who lost both her sons in the war, kept it until her death in 1959, never speaking about its contents. The numbers tell part of the story. Italian casualties in the Greek campaign: 13,755 dead, 50,874 wounded, 25,067 missing, many frozen to death and never recovered. 12,368 cases of severe frostbite requiring amputation or extended hospitalization. Total, approximately 102,064 casualties. Greek casualties: 13,325 dead, 42,485 wounded, 1,237 missing. Total, approximately 57,047 casualties. But numbers cannot capture what this campaign meant. For Italy, the Greek disaster shattered the carefully constructed myth of fascist military prowess. Mussolini's regime never recovered its prestige. The humiliation forced Italy into permanent subordination to Germany. Italian participation in the rest of World War II would be marked by defeats, desertions, and, ultimately, the collapse of fascism and civil war. Dr. Sofia Constantinou, professor of Balkan history at the University of Athens, argues, the Greek victory over Italy represented one of the few bright moments for the Allied cause in the dark year of 1940. When Britain stood alone, when France had fallen, when the United States remained neutral, Greece showed that resistance was possible. Churchill himself acknowledged that, hence we will not say that Greeks fight like heroes, but that heroes fight like Greeks. This moral victory, though it didn't prevent eventual German conquest, provided hope at a crucial moment. For Greece, the campaign became a defining moment of modern national identity. OXI Day, October 28th, remains a national holiday. The winter campaign of 1940-41 is taught in schools as an example of Greek courage and resistance to tyranny. But the Greek victory also came with a terrible price. The German invasion, partly motivated by the need to bail out Italy, brought catastrophic occupation. Over 300,000 Greeks would die during the occupation, many from famine in the winter of 1941-42. The Greek Jewish community would be nearly annihilated in the Holocaust. Greek resistance movements would fight both Germans and each other, setting the stage for civil war. Counterfactual historians sometimes ask, what if Greece had submitted to the Italian ultimatum? Would Greece have avoided German occupation? Would the Greek catastrophe of 1941-1945 have been averted? Perhaps. But at what cost to national honor and identity? Professor Hammond offers perspective. The Greek decision to resist must be understood in its full context. This wasn't just about military calculations. It was about who the Greeks understood themselves to be as a people. They are the heirs of Marathon and Thermopylae, of civilizations that invented the very concept of democracy. To submit without resistance to fascist invasion would have violated something fundamental to Greek identity. The cost of resistance was terrible, but the cost to the national soul of submission might have been worse. The Italian failure in Greece had consequences far beyond the Balkans. Hitler's forced intervention delayed Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, by approximately 5 to 6 weeks. The Germans invaded on June 22, 1941, instead of mid-May as originally planned. Those 5 weeks mattered. The German advance into the Soviet Union, initially overwhelming, stalled in the autumn mud and then the Russian winter, just short of Moscow. If the invasion had begun in mid-May instead of late June, German forces would have had 5 additional weeks of good weather to advance. Moscow might have fallen. The entire course of World War II might have changed. We cannot know for certain, but it's at least plausible that Mussolini's vanity project in Greece and the resulting need for German intervention contributed to the eventual German defeat in Russia and thus to the Allied victory in World War II. Dr. Kowalski notes, "This is one of history's great ironies. Mussolini invaded Greece to prove Italian greatness and independence from Germany. Instead, his catastrophic failure forced German intervention, delayed Barbarossa, and potentially contributed to Germany's ultimate defeat. The butterfly effect of that single word, OXI, may have helped change the outcome of the entire war." The British also drew strategic benefit. The Greek resistance tied down Italian divisions that might otherwise have been deployed in North Africa. British intervention in Greece, though ultimately unsuccessful, established important relationships with Greek resistance movements that would prove valuable later. And the moral boost of Greek success, however temporary, mattered in Britain's darkest hour. For the Italian military, Greece became a symbol of everything wrong with fascist pretensions. Italian soldiers knew they had been sent to fight an unprepared, unnecessary war by leaders who valued propaganda over preparation. Morale never recovered. When the Allies invaded Sicily in 1943, Italian resistance was minimal. The fighting spirit of the Italian soldier, questionable in Greece, evaporated entirely. The Greek campaign also revealed the fundamental weakness of fascist military systems. Both Italian and German fascism prioritized ideology over competence, loyalty over expertise, propaganda over reality. Generals like Praska were selected for political reliability rather than military ability. Intelligence was filtered to tell leaders what they wanted to hear. Planning was subordinated to political imperatives. These systemic flaws would plague Axis forces throughout the war. The Greek campaign was simply the first time they were so spectacularly exposed. Beyond strategy and statistics, the Greek campaign was experienced by hundreds of thousands of individual human beings, soldiers, civilians, families whose lives were forever altered. In the Albanian mountains, thousands of Italian soldiers froze to death, far from home, fighting a war they didn't understand for objectives that made no sense. Their letters home, censored but still revealing, speak of confusion, fear, and betrayal by the leaders who sent them into winter mountains in summer uniforms. One such letter, from Private Marco Antonelli to his mother, dated December 10, 1940, was intercepted by censors and preserved in military archives. "Mama, they told us we would be in Athens by now, welcomed as liberators. Instead, we are dying in these cursed mountains. My friend Carlo lost 3 toes to frostbite. Sergio was killed by a sniper yesterday. We have no food, no proper clothing, no hope. The Greeks fight like demons. They know every path, every hiding place. At night we hear them singing their songs. It terrifies us more than their bullets. If I do not return, know that I love you, and that I died not for some glorious cause, but because someone in Rome wanted to play at empire. There is no glory here, only cold and death and waste." Private Antonelli died of exposure on December 18, 1940. He was 19 years old. On the Greek side, the initial euphoria of victory gave way to the grim reality of defensive warfare in winter conditions. Greek supply systems, already inadequate, strained to maintain forces in Albanian territory. Medical care was primitive. Casualties from exposure affected Greek forces as well, though less severely than the Italians. But the Greeks were fighting for their homes, their families, their freedom. That made all the difference. Eleni Papadopoulos, a nurse from Athens who volunteered to serve in field hospitals near the Albanian front, recorded her experiences in a diary later published as a memoir. "The wounded came in endless streams, frostbite cases, shrapnel wounds, men with limbs shattered by artillery. We had almost no morphine, inadequate bandages, no antibiotics. I held boys as they died, telling them they were heroes, that Greece was proud of them. Sometimes they asked about their mothers. Sometimes they sang the old songs. Sometimes they just cried. We saved who we could. We comforted those we couldn't save. And we were proud, so proud, because we were free people defending our freedom, not slaves sent to die for a dictator's vanity. Eleni survived the war and became one of Greece's leading advocates for military, medical reform. She lived to age 92, spending her final decades speaking to schools about the importance of resistance to tyranny. The civilian population of Greece endured as well. British bombing of Italian positions sometimes hit Greek villages. The later German invasion brought systematic brutality. The occupation years brought starvation, reprisals, and horror. But in the winter of 1940-41, for a few magical months, Greece stood tall. Civilians sacrificed everything to support the troops. Women donated wedding rings to buy equipment. Children collected scrap metal. Farmers gave food they could barely spare. The entire nation mobilized in a way that transcended politics, class, and regional differences. Stavros Mikalopoulos, a shopkeeper from Thessaloniki who was too old for military service, organized civilian supply efforts. We had so little, but we gave everything. My shop, 3 generations in my family, I emptied it to supply the troops, blankets, food, anything useful. My neighbors did the same. Were we foolish? Perhaps. We bankrupted ourselves for a cause that ultimately could not succeed against Germany. But I have never regretted it. For those months, we were not just shopkeepers and farmers and teachers. We were Greeks, standing together against tyranny. My grandchildren ask if it was worth it, knowing we would lose to Germany anyway. I tell them, we did not lose to Italy. We beat Italy. We showed that resistance is possible. That must be worth something. Stavros lost his shop during the occupation and never recovered financially. He spent his final years in modest poverty, but according to his family, he never expressed regret for his choices in 1940. The triumph of the Greek victory over Italy is forever shadowed by what followed. The German invasion of April 1941 was brutal and efficient. The occupation that followed was catastrophic. The Great Famine of 1941-1942 killed an estimated 300,000 Greeks, more than 20 times the military casualties of the Italian campaign. Nazi racial policies and the Holocaust annihilated Greek Jewish communities that had existed for millennia. Greek resistance movements, both communist and nationalist, fought the occupiers with the same courage shown in 1940, but also fought each other, planting seeds of the civil war that would devastate Greece from 1946 to 1949. Captain Dimitrios Kaslas, survivor of the Albanian campaign, would fight again in the resistance and then, tragically, in the civil war. His letters from this period reflect a profound disillusionment. In 1940, we were united. Greeks fought together for Greece. Now we Greeks kill each other while our country bleeds. The clarity we had, the simple righteousness of resisting invasion, is gone, replaced by ideological hatreds I barely understand. Sometimes I think our victory over Italy was the last pure moment before everything became complicated and dark. This complexity, the way the glory of 1940 was tarnished by the tragedy of what followed, makes the Greek campaign difficult to evaluate in simple terms. Dr. Constantinou reflects, Greeks carry a bittersweet relationship with the 1940 victory. We are immensely proud of it, rightfully so, but we also know it couldn't prevent the catastrophe that followed. Some ask, did the resistance provoke worse German reprisals than submission would have? Did the victory create false confidence that made the later defeat more devastating? These are painful questions without easy answers. Yet even acknowledging these complexities, the Greek victory over Italy retains its power. In the darkest year of the war, when Nazi Germany seemed unstoppable, Tiny Greece said no and made it stick, at least against Italy. That mattered to people living under occupation across Europe. It mattered to the British, fighting alone. It mattered to Americans, watching from across the Atlantic and deciding whether resistance to totalitarianism was futile. The Norwegian resistance, the Yugoslav partisans, the French Maquis, all drew inspiration from the Greek example. If Greece could resist, so could they. At its core, the Italian invasion of Greece is a story about hubris, the ancient Greek concept of arrogant pride that brings divine punishment. How appropriate that Mussolini's hubris was punished in Greece, the birthplace of the concept. Mussolini believed Italian fascism had created a new kind of military force, tougher, more aggressive, more willing to sacrifice than decadent democracies. He believed his own propaganda about Italian martial superiority. He dismissed intelligence suggesting Greek resistance would be significant. He overruled military advisors who counseled caution. In short, he believed what he wanted to believe rather than what evidence suggested. This is the eternal pattern of strategic failure. From Napoleon in Russia, to the United States in Vietnam, to the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, powerful nations repeatedly underestimate weaker opponents, overestimate their own capabilities, and confuse military strength with inevitable victory. Professor Hammond notes, the Italian invasion of Greece should be taught in every military academy as a cautionary tale. It demonstrates how political imperatives can override military reality, how propaganda can substitute for planning, how arrogance can blind leaders to obvious problems. Every element of military incompetence is on display: poor intelligence, inadequate logistics, unrealistic objectives, inadequate preparation, and leadership selected for political loyalty rather than competence. But the campaign also teaches positive lessons. The Greek defense demonstrates that material inferiority doesn't guarantee defeat if the weaker side possesses superior motivation, better knowledge of terrain, and competent leadership. Papagos was not a military genius, but he was competent and realistic, qualities that proved superior to Praska's flashy incompetence. The Greek victory also shows the power of morale and national cohesion. Greek soldiers fought for their homes and families. Italian soldiers fought for, what? Mussolini's prestige? An empire they didn't want, objectives that made no sense? Motivation matters. It cannot overcome every material disadvantage, but it can overcome many. Dr. Kowalski argues, we often reduce military history to counting divisions and comparing equipment. The Greek campaign reminds us that war is ultimately a human endeavor, fought by people with beliefs, fears, and motivations. The Greeks believed in their cause. The Italians didn't believe in theirs, that asymmetry mattered more than division counts. 84 years have passed since that pre-dawn moment when Ioannis Metaxas spoke a single word that changed history. Most of the participants are dead now. The soldiers who froze in Albanian mountains, the nurses who tended the wounded, the civilians who gave everything to support the defense. Almost all are gone. But OXI, no, still echoes. It echoes every time a small nation refuses to bow to a larger aggressor. It echoes in every resistance movement that chooses dignity over submission. It echoes in the understanding that courage matters, that moral victories have value even when material defeat follows, that how a nation responds to existential crisis defines its character. The Greek campaign of 1940-41 teaches us uncomfortable truths. It teaches us that pride and propaganda make poor substitutes for competent planning. It teaches us that underestimating your opponent is a strategic sin that the battlefield punishes mercilessly. It teaches us that modern equipment and numerical superiority don't guarantee victory if the side possessing them lacks motivation and competent leadership. But it also teaches us that resistance is possible, that small nations can defend their dignity even against overwhelming odds, that the human spirit, properly motivated and reasonably led, can achieve things that seem impossible on paper. The Italian soldiers who froze in the Albanian mountains deserve our sympathy. They were victims of their leaders' vanity and incompetence. They died for objectives that made no sense, poorly prepared and inadequately equipped, far from home in a war they didn't understand. The Greek soldiers who fought them deserve our admiration. They faced long odds with inadequate equipment, but they had something the Italians lacked: absolute clarity about why they were fighting. They were defending their homes, their families, and their freedom. That made all the difference. In the end, Germany's intervention meant that Greece's military victory was temporary. The occupation that followed was catastrophic. The post-war civil war was devastating. The simple clarity of 1940, Greece versus Italian fascism, democracy versus tyranny, gave way to complexity and tragedy. But for 6 months, from October 1940 to April 1941, Greece stood as proof that resistance was possible in the darkest year of the 20th century's darkest conflict that mattered. Today, when we face questions about whether small nations can resist larger aggressors, whether courage and determination matter in the age of high technology, whether moral victories have value even when material defeat follows, we can look to Greece in 1940. We can look to Lieutenant Dimitrios Kaslas, the school teacher who became a soldier and helped drive back an invasion. We can look to Private Giuseppe Bevilacqua, the conscript who died in the snow, a victim of his leader's hubris. We can look to Eleni Papadopoulos, the nurse who saved who she could and comforted those she couldn't. We can look to Colonel Antonio Russo, who witnessed catastrophic failure and spent the rest of his life haunted by the waste. We can look to all the ordinary people, Greek and Italian, soldier and civilian, named and nameless, who lived through this campaign and whose choices, sacrifices, and suffering shaped history. And we can remember that single word spoken in the pre-dawn darkness of October 28, 1940, that set all of this in motion. OXI. No. Some words echo through eternity. For Dimitrios Kaslas, Giuseppe Bevilacqua, Eleni Papadopoulos, and all those who fought, suffered, and endured the winter of 1940-41, Greeks and Italians alike. Victims, all of decisions made by men who never had to face the consequences of their hubris. May we learn from their sacrifice. May we remember that no to tyranny always matters, even when followed by defeat. May we never forget the price of vanity, the value of courage, or the power of a single word spoken with conviction. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please share it with others who appreciate history's forgotten lessons. Subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Comment below with your thoughts on what the Greek resistance of 1940 teaches us today. History belongs to all of us, especially the parts we've forgotten or never learned. The heroes of 1940 spoke for all of us when they said no to fascism. Their voices still matter. Their sacrifice still resonates. Their example still inspires. Remember them. Honor them. Learn from them. That is how we ensure they did not suffer in vain.